There's a sentiment or philosophy that's become pretty popular today, and a lot of people say it, a lot of people repeat things along these lines, and I'm afraid that some Christians have even repeated these things or believe these things. And it goes something like this. You, whether you're a religious person or a not religious person, what you should do is you should keep God away from anything public or secular. Like, keep God out of the public square. Like, separate the two. Like, there's this public square, and then there's this God place that maybe you can talk about God at church, and you can talk about God in your family, but don't, like, take that outside of the bounds of your church or your house or things like that. You may have heard this before. It's a funny statement, though, because if you think about it, God made everything. That's what the book of Genesis teaches us pretty clearly. Like, God made the public sphere and the private sphere. God is in control, whether we're talking about church, whether we're talking about your family, whether we're talking about your decisions about where you go to college. Like, God is in charge of all of that because he's the one who made us. And not just the one who made us, he's the one that gave us a lot of instructions on what's right and wrong. And that question about should God be included in things is not just about should we mention God's name or should we talk about Jesus. That's not really what it's about. It's whether or not God has the right to inform how we put everything together, how we order our society, which is kind of a strange thing. That's pretty a political idea, or it's a pretty public square concept. But I want to tell you that the Bible actually talks a lot about this. In fact, this is not one of those off-limits topics that the Bible doesn't speak to. Like, there's a lot of things the Bible doesn't speak to. There's plenty of things it doesn't talk about. But this is not one of them. God's word talks a lot about how society should be ordered, and even down to some political decisions. God's word has a lot to say about it, and it really starts in Genesis chapter 9, and I want to look at this passage because we live in a Genesis 9 world. And that's kind of an odd thought. Genesis 9 happened a long time ago, but I want you to think about this. When God made the world, he put these people in this garden, right? And he provided for them. He protected them. It was perfect, right? Then they sin. They break God's law. God casts them out of the garden. And there's this time between the Garden of Eden and the flood that we talked about last week, where people were multiplying. People were living a really long time. But the problem was they were extremely sinful. And in Genesis chapters 4, 5, and 6, we see how sin goes from bad to worse, so bad that God has to come along and say, it's so evil, I need to start over completely. And that's what the flood was about. Nathan talked about that last week. And as the flood waters subside, and Noah and his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, as these 8 people get out of the ark, I want you to imagine what a weird experience that would be. Some scholars think that there were up to billions of people that were on the earth when the flood took place. That's possible with how many children they were having and how long they were living. It was possible there were millions and maybe even billions of people, and guess what? They're all gone. This would be a weird experience if you were one of those 8 who survived. 8 people survived. And what would God say to these 8 people after they get out of the ark? Like, this is a fresh start. It's a restart. What's the world going to be like? What's God going to emphasize? What's God going to tell them? Like, hey guys, here's how you should change what happened so you don't make all those big mistakes that they used to make. Here's what he says in Genesis chapter 9. After they get out of the ark, at the end of Genesis 8, God's talking about how he's not going to curse the ground in the same way. He's not going to have the earth not have these issues. In fact, he says he'll have seasons take place where he's going to give summer and winter, which maybe was not happening before then. We talked a little bit about how it's possible that this earth before the flood had some kind of water canopy, some kind of layer over the top of it, which perhaps accounts for why you can find wildlife in places that are completely inhospitable today. Maybe the reason was God brought more extreme weather after the flood. And he says, but I'm going to throw it in seasons. You'll have a summer, you'll have a winter, you'll have a spring. He wasn't talking about Southern California because we're just kind of like hot and a little bit less hot, okay? But most places on earth, there's these seasons. Obviously, there's seasons here too. But he says, I'm going to set that up. And then chapter 9, verse 1, look what God says. God blessed Noah and his sons, which is so important. I mean, think about the world before that. Like, they just saw millions of people perish in this flood. And there are a lot of sinful things that were happening on this earth. And you might say God's just continuing to be upset with his people. But he says he blessed Noah and his sons. And he said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That is almost a direct quote from what God said to Adam and Eve back in Genesis chapter 1. So this is super important. After the flood, you might have expected God to say, there were too many people. We had an overpopulation problem. And they were all a bunch of sinners, and they were really bad. So let's take a break from this whole having kids thing. Let's not have so many, like maybe just one per couple or two per couple. He says the opposite. He says, no, you need to restart this. There are no people. I mean, imagine growing up in a world with millions, maybe even 1 billion people, and now there's 8 left. He says, we need to restart this thing. Let's do it the right way this time. But he says, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. Verse number 2 says, the fear of you, you human beings, and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every bird of the heavens, and upon everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hands they are delivered. So this is different than what God said at the beginning. Because if you remember in the garden, he told Adam and Eve, he said, hey, you got this world. There's going to be perfect harmony in this world. The animals would not be afraid of Adam, right? You know how you see certain animals and they'll scurry away today. That's not how it was in the garden. There was no reason for there to be anything wrong between them. But now he says, now I'm going to say they're going to be afraid of you. And that's still how it is today. Most animals are afraid of you. Most animals that aren't afraid of you are not afraid of you for one of two reasons. Either they've been conditioned to not be afraid of you. So you imagine, the pigeon in New York City, right? They're not afraid of people in the same way because they're with them all the time. Or because those beasts are bigger and stronger than you, and they're really like the predators, and that's why they're not afraid of you. But all the other animals, all the other birds, they have this natural bent to not want to be with you. It takes work to domesticate animals. That wasn't the case before, but now it is. He says, into your hands they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. That's unique. So it seems like before the flood, God had not directly told them, you can eat animals. In fact, at the very beginning, in the garden, it didn't seem like any animal eating was happening at all because there was no killing like that. They weren't killing animals until after sin takes place. But remember, animals had been killed for sacrifice from a long time before. So there's a debate. It's either the people were eating flesh and it was wrong and they shouldn't have been, or nobody was eating flesh before. Nobody was eating animals. It was a weird thing. But now God says, regardless of which one of those two is correct, now he says, I'm giving animals for you for food. You can have those animals. You can eat your steaks. You can have your burgers. You can do that. God has given those to you to eat. This is unique. Maybe it wasn't the same before. Verse number 4, and you shall not eat the flesh with its life, that is, its blood. So you were supposed to not just drink blood, which, you're like, okay, I don't need to drink blood. But this, by the time of Moses, who wrote this down, this was a common practice among these pagans who were worshiping false gods, like drinking blood. Even if I say, who drinks blood today? You'd be like, oh, that kind of sounds like a satanic, pagan ritual. Like, yeah, it's true. It was back then, and it is a little bit today as well. Verse number 5, he says, and for your lifeblood, I will require a reckoning. So we already saw this with Cain and Abel, right? Cain kills Abel. What does God say? His blood is crying to me from the ground. It's crying for revenge. So he says, I am going to take revenge on the people if they kill you, like what happened with Cain and Abel. He says, I'll require it from them. From every beast, I will require it. So if an animal kills a human being, right, God says he wants to take revenge on that animal. But he also says, and from man. So if a human being kills another human being, which is what has already happened plenty of times, he says, I'll require it from him. From his fellow man, which that word fellow man in your Bibles, really, I wish it didn't say that because that's not what the word means. The word just means brother. It's the word for brother. We've seen it a ton of times in the text already with Cain and Abel. Remember, he says, and he killed his brother, and it was his brother, his brother, his brother. That's the same word. So really, it should be brother, but the reason they say fellow man is because we don't have to be talking about your biological brother. This could be any other human being. It says, from his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for the life of man. And then he summarizes, verse 6. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. This is all taking us back to the very beginning, saying, I know life is different now, but God still has made every single person that's alive today in his image. God still values life. He still cares about the life of every single image bearer that lives on this planet, and you should too. So the reason I said this is we're living in a Genesis 9 world is because everything that he talks about here still applies to us today. That's not true of every passage in the Bible. There's a lot of passages in the Bible where he's talking to a very small group of people for a very particular instance, right? Like even a lot of the promises that are made to Israel, even some of the rules that are given to the Israelites were specific just for them, right? Everything here goes beyond that. The reason is if you keep reading, verse number 7, he just repeats the same command, be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth and multiply it. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you. Okay, so notice that. What he's promising here, these commands, these rules, and also these gracious promises, they're not just made to Noah. They're not just made to Noah's 3 sons. They're made to all of Noah's descendants. That's you. That's me. And every nation that would spring out of this group of people, it applies to everybody. Now, not everybody follows what God's word says, but what we're reading today is amazing because it applies to every single culture. These are the rules. These are the instructions. This is what God says. And there's a lot just in those first 7 or 8 verses that we're going to cover here this morning. The first one, the way I want to do this, your 5 points in your outline are all trying to say God tells us something that he does in these passages, and then he says, okay, because I do this thing, you should do something like it, or you should respond to it in a certain way. So there's 5 things, 4 from the first 7 verses, and 1 from this promise to not judge the world. So the first one comes in verses 1 and verse 7. It's just a repeated command. It's the be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. So God is promising he's going to continue to produce, but what he calls us to do when it comes to producing people is we're supposed to reproduce families. So that was true before the flood. It's true after the flood. So point number 1, you can write that down. God produces, so we should reproduce families. That is still applicable to people today. I know this is so ancient, right? But really, if you think about the epics of history, you've got the Garden of Eden. Life was a certain way. Everything changed after that. Not everything, but a lot of things changed after that. Then before the flood, things were a certain way. People were living for hundreds of years. Sin was increasing on the earth. That was a certain kind of life. Then the flood happened. We stand between God's destruction of the earth through a flood of water. We stand between that and what 2 Peter 3 says, his destruction of the world through fire. We all live in between that. It's just that Genesis 9 is like the dawn of a new day. It's like day 1 of this new world, but we're still living in that world. Now, God's going to come back. God's going to destroy this earth. He's going to remake it. That's what the Bible clearly teaches. But we're still living in this time where the promises and the commands of Genesis 9 apply as much to us today as they did to them back then. So, God produces, we should reproduce families. I know that this is like a cultural sermon or a sermon about society, and it almost sounds political because these are political topics, but I need you to realize that if you're going to look to the Bible and have your worldview, your thinking shaped from the Bible, then there's some inescapable conclusions, and one of them is that you should feel the pressure and you should feel the necessity to reproduce a family. Like that's a good thing. That's what God says you should do. Now, there are situations in which people can't do that. People experience what's called death early in their life, and they can't reproduce families, okay? That's fine. That's in God's plan as well. People also stay single for reasons of the gospel. That's what 1 Corinthians 7 says. There's reasons to do that, okay? But other than that, that's only a small percentage of people. That leaves the 90% or the 80% of everybody else. You should feel pressure, not from a politician or your parents or your pastor. You should just feel pressure by reading God's word saying, I want to do what God's word says. And one of those things is to get married and have a family, okay? That's not something we talk about every single week in True North. It's in Genesis a lot, but you should feel that pressure. The reason I bring that up is because in our culture, the world does not give you that pressure at all. In fact, it's very popular today. What's called an anti-natalist worldview means to say we're against having children. For plenty of reasons. One article came out a couple weeks ago from the Wall Street Journal. It was an article about birth rates and how birth rates are falling. And I've talked to you about this before. But in this article, there was this lady from the country of Hungary, and she was talking about life as a woman in Hungary. She's a 35-year-old lady, and she makes an interesting statement about having babies, right? So she's 35. She's, most of the way through her time where she's able to have kids. She's almost done with that. And she says something interesting about having kids. She says, it's not our duty as Hungarian women to keep the nation alive. It's like, well, it kind of is, though, right? Like, it's like saying, it's not our job as American women to keep America alive. It's like, well, kind of a weird way to put it, but like, no, that kind of is your job, like, to keep your family going, like, to keep your nation alive. That actually is your job, right? Not your only job, not your only purpose, but like, it is definitely one of them. That's like saying, yeah, it's not our job to have kids and to repopulate the earth. It's like, no, the Bible actually says it is your job, right? Now, is it every last person's job, right? No, because some people, it does not apply to, but for the vast majority of people, they're a part of this. So if you'd hear it nowhere else, you should hear from church, because it's right here in the Bible. You should feel that pressure, that's a good thing that you should aspire to. Some reasons for that. One, the Bible talks about how God produces human life. And this is what's so amazing, is, kind of odd thought, but what two human beings do to produce life, there's no creative act that they're choosing the genetics of their child. Like, this is something that two human beings do, but God is involved in this conception. Like, it's God that does the work to produce this child. It's God who gives life to this child. It's not, it's not just these human beings. I can give you some verses on that. One of them is Psalm 139, verses 13 and 14. When you think about, the fact that you were given life by God, that's an amazing truth. The one day you didn't exist, and then the next you did. You had no life, then you had life. Where'd that life come from? All life comes from God, ultimately. Okay? Psalm 139, verse 13, David writes about how he was created. He says, for you, God, formed my inward parts, my organs, everything inside my body. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. Poetic language to say, like, who is really creating that baby? So, sometimes we joke, with the pregnant ladies here at True North, right? The leaders are all, a lot of people having babies and stuff. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean the students. I meant the leaders who are pregnant. But it's like, hey, you're making a baby. That's crazy, right? You tired? It's like, yeah, I'm tired. It's like they're making a baby, but they're not like deciding, okay, well, I'm going to put the hairs together and I'm working on their fingernails today. Like, you realize these mothers they're making a baby, yes, but they're not like making. God's making it, right? God's forming this child, right? You can't. I know maybe you haven't thought about that, but that's how it works, right? God's forming this child in a mother's womb. Is she working? Yes, her body's working, but like not like you would if you were making, some puzzle on your kitchen table where you're like, okay, I'm going to put this here. That's not how this works. God puts us together in our mother's womb. David says there, I praise you, God, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Also, David also writes, or actually this is Solomon who writes this in Psalm 127, verse 3. He says, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb, a reward. It says, like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. So it's an image of like, kids are like arrows that you put and you can shoot out. You got bows and arrows. Blessed is the man. Blessed by God is the person who has a lot of them. Children of actually one's youth too, not children of one's old age. Even notice that. Like, the assumption is associated with God's blessing is children, and not just one, but multiple, and not just when you're old, but relatively speaking, when you're relatively young. That is the picture in the Bible of how this should work. And because it's the picture in the Bible of how it should work, I would tell you it's what you should aim for. Okay? It's not that it will happen for everybody, but that is definitely what you should aim for. He says about this person who has a lot of kids, he says, he shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. Then right in the next chapter, it just goes right over, the next song says, blessed is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. You shall eat the fruit of the labor of your hands, and you shall be blessed, and it shall be well with you. So this is just talking about a guy who fears God, right? But the next verse says, your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house,
and your children will be like olive shoots around your table. Behold, thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord. So in those two Psalms, the reason I quote them both together is because both of them talk about God's blessing and fearing God and obeying God and having kids. So those things tend to go together, not always, right? There's righteous people who can't have kids. Abraham can't have kids. Sarah can't have kids. Rachel can't have kids. Like there's a lot of people, Elizabeth in the New Testament can't have kids. It's not saying that, righteousness leads to always having children, right? Because there are people who are righteous who don't, but the general course of things is that's what's going to happen if you're living a life of fearing God. So, God says we should do that. You should do that when you get married. Okay. Now you're glad that point's over. Point number 2, okay? You're squirming. Freshmen are like piecing things together as I was talking, Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Okay. Verses number 2, 3, and 4, what are they about? Right, in our text, if you look at it, Genesis 9, God's telling Noah, hey, I'm going to make the animals all freaked out of you, and you're not going to get along, but hey, guess what? Now you can eat them. So congratulations. In-N-Out Burgers can open from this point on, okay? That's amazing. So what is this about? What do we learn about God? What do we learn about what we should do? Okay. When he gives the animals, just want you to think about it, he doesn't say, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have all the animals show up to your house, and I'm just going to knock them dead, and then they'll be on your front porch. It's like, those grocery apps that you can get meat shipped to your house, right? This is not what he's saying is going to happen. He's saying you can go get them, but I don't know if you know how hunting works. They usually run away from you, okay? So most of the time they run away. But you have to trap them. You have to be industrious just to figure out how to get food. But guess what? God says, I'm putting this food in this world. You can go get it, okay? That means God provides, but we have to work. That's the second thing. Point number 2, God provides, but we should utilize his creation is the way I put it. God's going to provide what we need, but he doesn't just give it to us. He doesn't just say, hey, I'm giving those animals to you, and they're just going to show up at your front door. He's saying, I'm giving them to you, but the assumption here is they need to go work. They need to utilize God's creation. Even here, this whole concept of you can eat the flesh of animals, there's certain things he doesn't want them to eat. He doesn't want them to drink blood, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Even in the book of Leviticus, we find out that the blood is associated with the atonement and the life-giving aspect of an animal, right? So that's associated because, if you killed an animal in a sacrifice, the blood was symbolic of the life. So he says, I don't want you, drinking animals' blood or people's blood, but you can eat their flesh. But here, a couple things. This speaks to our culture, in any culture. The New Testament even affirms this, that laziness is against God's orders for our society. You should not be a lazy person. You should not say that just because you're in a system where you can get government assistance for not working, the Bible and this instruction would tell you that's not how you should live. Right? If you can work, you need to work. If you can provide for yourself, you need to provide for yourself. Right? Laziness is not good on a cultural level or a societal level. If you're saying, yeah, my dream is to grow up and not work, I would tell you that's not a good dream, okay? Work is involved in everything we do, whether that's being a parent, whether that's working a job outside, whether that's doing any of those things, you have to work. You have to do something. The way it's put in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10 is, Paul told this church, he said, even when we were with you, we would give you this command. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. That's what the Bible says. If you're not willing to work, you shouldn't be allowed to eat. And then you could take that and flip it on its head to say, if you're dealing with somebody who's not willing to work, you should not feed them either. Right? If that's what we're commanded here, right? If anyone's not willing to work, here's what we're talking about. We're talking about adults who are able-bodied and capable. Okay? That's what we're talking about here, not children. Okay? I heard that. You're like, children? Yeah. I'll continue to feed Eden, okay? But not when she's 25 if she can work and she's not willing to work, right? This is God's plan in creation. Any system in our society that sets it up so that people can not work and continue to eat when they're able to work, okay, is unjust. It's wrong. It shouldn't be the case. Also, in this text, it's very interesting. We're thinking about society and culture. Do you realize that extreme environmentalism is unbiblical, right? The extreme thinking, we cannot use the oil. We cannot use the oil, okay? if that's your extreme position that there's no use of what God has put in the ground, that's wrong. That's not biblical. God says he gave us things to use. Now, on the other side, it's not saying that you can just abuse everything that God's given you. You can abuse the animals. It's not saying that. In fact, this actually says you can't even eat the flesh with the blood. So there's some kind of abuse that he says, I don't want you to do that. And maybe some scholars think the reason is if you were to eat the flesh with the blood, that's like what an animal would do, right? It's like you don't just grab an animal and just start biting and eating it alive. He says that's not right. That's not how humans should do this, right? And that's a weird image. But that would be one example of eating the flesh with the blood, where God says, no, that's not right. You can eat the flesh, but don't, eat the squirrel while it's still alive, right? And that's a weird thought, but I'm thinking of an animal that you would see, right? That would be strange if you saw any human being go up and grab a squirrel, tail, head, and just take a bite out of it, right? You'd say, it wouldn't be weird to go to, I don't know, the county fair and see someone grab a turkey leg that's the same size, right? Grab both sides and eat it. You'd be like, oh, yeah, that's like fine. It's, kind of weird, but it's normal, right? They can do that. But one of those, you'd be like, that's wrong. Well, that's eating the flesh with the blood. So you're already conditioned to know that that's weird and wrong. Okay. So my point is extreme environmentalism on one hand. It's not biblical, right? Animal abuse, right? Okay, that's probably unbiblical too, right? We want to respect the life of our beast. What is called today veganism, right? By conviction is not biblical, right? The Bible would not require you to do that. And by the way, environmentalism is very similar to a religion today. If you study the tenets of environmentalism, there is an ethical code, there is an eschatology, there's what's going to happen at the end of the world if we don't all get this all right. It's just a little silly. So, there you go. All right, what's next? Verse 5 talks about how God says, if someone kills a human being, I take that personally. I will require it of them. There's going to be a reckoning. There's going to be a day of vengeance. If someone goes up and kills some human being, that's going to be a problem for me, God says. So, point number 3, you can put it this way. God protects, so we should value life. Right? He says, I have an eye to every single human being, every image bearer. I care what happens to them. So God kind of looks down and protects. So what should we do? How should we order our society after the flood? Well, we should value life. Christians should value life as much as anybody. More than anybody, because they understand why. The text says, for your lifeblood, I will require a reckoning. From every beast, I will require it, and from man. So if an animal kills a human being, what does God think should happen? That animal should be killed. Okay? And from man, what's the requirement? Like, what is God wanting to happen if somebody murders a human being? It says, from his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for the life of a man. Still, we don't know what that is. Verse 6 gives us more clarity. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. Okay? So what does God think should happen to a murderer? Right? God thinks that murderer should be put to death. And you say, well, does God just always take care of it? Well, look what the text says. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. Okay? So this is what's called sometimes the death penalty or capital punishment. Okay? If you think, hey, as a Christian, it sounds really mean and wrong to put people to death, I'd say, okay. But God says, he commands, this is actually the way it should be for the most extreme situations. He's not saying, hey, what you should do is every time someone steals a loaf of bread, just kill them, put them to death. No, that's unjust. That's an unjust law. But this is a just law. So if you're one of those people that say, hey, I'm a compassionate Christian and I'm against the death penalty, I'd say you're against what God says. You can be against the death penalty in a lot of situations. You could be not for everyone getting put to death. Okay. But you can't be against it in principle, and you can't be against it for the serious crime of taking someone's life in a murderous act, because God says that. Like, this is where, like, if you don't know the Bible, you think this sounds probably pretty political, right? This is not political. This is pre-political, right? All the stuff that we're talking about today from Genesis 9, this is not like, all right, guys, I made a sermon up like the election's happening in 2 weeks. Like, let's figure out how to like make some people mad, right? That's not the point here. The point is like saying, what does the Bible say? Oh, look at that. There's a lot of things that just, God already told us what's right and what's wrong. which again, the big takeaway from Genesis, if you can get one big takeaway from Genesis, I want you to think about the world the way that God tells us to think about the world. I want you to think what's right and wrong, what's ethically good and what's ethically bad, based on what God's word says, right? That's one of the big reasons why we're studying this book all together this year. So, God protects, so we should value life. Here's a good question. Well, what is murder and what's not murder, right? Does this mean everyone who kills somebody should be killed? I don't think that's exactly what it means. By the way, before that, if you want to write this down, Exodus 21, 28 and 29. Remember that whole thing about an animal killing a human being that he said, if an animal sheds your blood, well, I'm going to require it of him. I had you write down Exodus 21 because the laws that God gives the Israelites keep coming back to Genesis 9. There's a ton of laws that keep getting referenced back to here, and this is one of them. This law, I'll just read it for you. It says, when an ox gores a man or a woman to death, okay, the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten. But the owner of the ox shall be liable, right? So it's an image of what happens if one animal kills somebody in the town. Okay. It says, well, the animal's going to be stoned, the animal's going to be killed, and then the owner is responsible in some way. What does it mean to be responsible? What does it mean to be liable? Verse 29 says, but if the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, so if the ox is known for being an animal that attacks other people, right, or animals, its owner has been warned, but has not kept it in, and it kills a man or woman, the ox shall be stoned, and also the owner shall be put to death. Okay? So that makes sense, right? Like if you know that your animal or your big, pit bull dog or whatever, it keeps biting kids' hands off, or whatever they do. If you know that, right, you're responsible to keep your animal from not doing that. And if the animal has done it in the past and then does it again, you're responsible. That's what God's law says. Okay. That was interesting. So what's murder and what's not murder? What's killing that requires blood guilt and what's killing that does not require blood guilt? Okay. 4 things that murder is in the Bible. One of them, the easiest one, is what we might call homicide today. It's this thing we saw in Genesis 4 where one person says, I hate you, I'm going to kill you, and then goes and kills them, right? That's murder. I called it the purposeful and premeditated killing of another person out of hatred, right? That's murder. That's your classic murder. The Bible's very clear about that. In Deuteronomy 19, and I'm going to quote a lot of laws to you, by the way, from the Old Testament. The reason is because every law of God is perfect. Every law of God is good. And if we're wise, we would say we want to learn something about what God thinks about humanity just from looking at his laws. Okay, so Deuteronomy 19, verse 11 says, if anyone hates his neighbor and lies in wait for him and attacks him and strikes him fatally so that he dies, if he flees to a city of refuge where you could be protected, the elders of that city shall send and take him from there and hand him over to the avenger of blood so that he may die. Your eyes shall not pity, but you shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from Israel, so that it may be well with you. So God cares. Like if someone died, if someone was murdered, and they come and run to you and say, oh, please protect me, this person's trying to attack me, right? And you find out what really happened, give them back over to the avenger of blood, right? Or else you're guilty. So homicide, premeditated, that you obviously know is murder. Here's another thing that is murder as well, something that I call a violent overreaction. Okay, so if you and somebody are having some disagreement, maybe you didn't wake up that morning saying, I'm going to go kill that person, but if you're in some fight with some person and it turns to get physical and then you go kill that person, biblically speaking, a violent overreaction, an unplanned but angry attack that kills somebody, that also is murder, right? The way it's broken down in our law is kind of the difference between first-degree murder and second- and third-degree murder. That's how it's put in Western law. But here's an example of that. Exodus 21, verse 12 says, whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death, right? That's obvious. We've already seen that. A couple verses later, verse 18 says, when men quarrel, so they're fighting, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and the man does not die, but takes to his bed, then if the man rises again and walks outdoors with his staff, he who struck him shall be clear, right? So he's giving an example of what happens if you almost kill somebody in a fight. says, well, you better hope that guy gets up and starts walking around, because if he does, okay, you're in the clear. We don't have to put you to death, okay? Only he shall pay for the loss of his time, and he shall have him thoroughly healed. So it's like, if you're in a fight with somebody, the modern day version of this is, if you got in a fight with somebody and you overreacted and you hit somebody in the head with a rock, you're paying for their medical bills, right? You're making sure they're healed. You're paying their back pay at work. You're taking care of all that. And what's implied earlier is, but if that person dies, right, life for life, right? That's a just rule. Another form of murder, so I said homicide, violent overreactions. This is the two that we mainly think of. But another, we've already talked about this, but it's something that our culture calls abortion. Okay? Abortion is the purposeful killing of a baby in his mother's womb. Right? That's also murder. Here's how it's put in the Bible, Exodus 21, verse 22. We're still in Exodus 21, right? A lot of these are in Exodus 21. It says, if men strive together, and they're quarreling, and they hit a pregnant woman, so that her child comes out, but if there's no harm, right, so if the baby's okay, then the one who hit her shall be fined, right, so a monetary fine, as the woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. So two people, so if you were to hit somebody, a pregnant lady, baby comes out, but baby's okay, well then you're going to be fined, right, the person who hit that pregnant lady, by the judgment of two people, the husband of that lady and the judge, right? So now you got two parties involved to make sure this husband's not like, an ambulance chaser saying like, okay, you got to pay me $1 million, right? No, the judge will step in and also determine this as well. But it goes on. It says, but if there is harm, right? Harm to who? Harm to the baby, who when this baby was hit was an unborn baby. If there is harm, well then you shall pay life for life. So think about how extreme this is. If two men are getting in a fight, right, and one even accidentally hits a pregnant lady so that baby dies, whether it was on purpose or accident, that person deserves to die. They shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and stripe for stripe. So if there's some kind of mutilation that happens to that kid, God's just law is, well, then that same mutilation has to happen to the person who inflicted the penalty, or who inflicted the crime. By the way, if you think that's extreme or crazy, I don't know if you know this, but even in California, where it's legal for a mother to kill her own child, it's not legal for you to kill someone else's preborn child. Penal Code 187 is the section that defines murder, and it includes the unlawful killing of a fetus. It states, murder is the unlawful killing of a human being or a fetus with malice aforethought. So here's the crazy thing. I don't know if you've ever known this, but the only difference, the only thing that makes a difference for the value of a unborn child's life in the state of California, legally speaking, is whether his mom wants to kill him or not. That's the only thing that gives a baby in our state legal status. That's crazy. That's unjust. It's wrong. Yeah. Okay, abortion. The fourth one, I know this might be unexpected, but suicide also is brought in this as well. Because if you look at the text, it says, for your lifeblood, I will require a reckoning. So if someone kills you, God says he's going to hold someone accountable. Right? From every beast I'll require it, and from man. Okay? From a person. So the problem that we see with murder usually is, if you murder somebody, that's bad because you wouldn't want someone to murder you, right? That's how we typically think about it. That's why is murder wrong? Is it just because you wouldn't want to happen to you? That's one reason, but it's not the only reason. The reason he gives here is not, hey, don't kill people because you wouldn't like if somebody killed you. That's not what he says. The thing he says is, because I made man in my own image, and because I will hold someone responsible for taking the life of an image bearer. Okay? So this is what's interesting. Suicide is included in what God forbids here. Do you see that? Because if God says, I don't want anyone to kill my image bearers, I don't want anyone to murder them, okay? If you do that to yourself, you are murdering an image bearer. That's wrong in God's eyes, right? So it's not just about the effect that it has on somebody. So you can't say, hey, well, they wanted to die, so it's okay for them to kill themselves. No, it's not. It's a sin. That's why throughout the entire history of the Christian tradition, and even before that, in Jewish history, suicide was always seen as a sin. Wrong, because you're killing an image bearer. It doesn't matter that it's yourself, it's still wrong. So, homicide, violent overreactions, abortion, suicide. Okay, that's what is murder. Here's what isn't murder, biblically speaking. I have 3 things that are not murder. One of them just comes from the text. This might be obvious to you, but verse 6 says, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. Question for you. If I murdered somebody and you served as the executioner for me, right, in this ancient situation, now you've shed the blood of man. Should someone come kill you? Okay, great. Let's say they do that. And then, okay, now somebody else has to kill that person because they shed the blood of man. And then someone else has to kill the person who, do you see what? It would be a killing circle, okay? So, in this text, there's at least one form of bloodshed that God does not say is bad and requires a reckoning. It's serving as an executioner to a justly condemned murderer, right? Like, that's one, right? Being the executioner. 2, another one, and the Bible speaks of, is self-defense, okay? To defend oneself when you're put in a perilous situation to kill somebody who's attempting to kill you, the Bible says you will not have blood guilt. If you kill somebody who's attacking to kill you, no, God's not going to hold you accountable for murder. Here's an example. Exodus 22, verse 2. It says, if a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. Okay? So imagine that's, someone breaks into your house in the middle of the night and they get shot. Even today, well, most places today, legally speaking, the person who acted in self-defense is legally protected. Why? Because it's their right to do so. God says they're not guilty of blood. They're not a murderer. Right? And that's the interesting thing. We think, if I killed somebody, does that make you a murderer? No, it does not. It does not make you a murderer. What makes you a murderer is murdering somebody. Killing somebody and murdering somebody is not exactly the same thing, right? Now, if you went and, killed your brother today, guess what? That's murder, okay? But some people can kill and it's not murder, like being an executioner, like self-defense. You might say, that's the Old Testament. Well, Luke chapter 22, verse 36, very interesting. Jesus tells his disciples, grab a money bag and take it. Grab a knapsack, grab a backpack. He's telling them a bunch of things that they should grab as living as a disciple in the world. He says, and let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. He says, that's how important self-defense is going to be for you, because these people would travel around a lot. There's a lot of people that would come try to attack them. He says, if you have a jacket but no sword, you'd be better off with the sword and no jacket. That's what Jesus says right before he dies to his disciples. Right? So, self-defense. Included in self-defense, by the way, are justified acts of war. Okay? That could be its whole separate category, but I could include that in self-defense because in traditional just war theory, usually a just reason to go to war is as an act of self-defense. Right? Being a soldier, it's like, does this mean being a soldier is wrong? What if you kill somebody? Right? Does that make you a murderer? No, it doesn't. Right? Now, you could be a murderer, right? If you unjustly take someone's life that you don't need to, right? That you could be a murderer, right? But that doesn't mean because you've killed somebody, you're now a murderer, biblically speaking. The third one, the Bible talks a lot about this, is what's called unintentional manslaughter, okay? When you accidentally kill somebody. The way it's put in Deuteronomy 19 is, he says, this is the provision that should be made for the manslayer, who by fleeing there to the city of refuge goes to save his life. If anyone kills his neighbor unintentionally, without having hated him in the past, as when, he gives an example, as if somebody goes into the forest with his neighbor to cut down wood. In his hand swings the axe to cut down the tree, and the head slips from the handle and strikes his neighbor so that he dies, he may flee to one of these cities and live. Lest the avenger of blood, in hot anger, pursue the manslayer, overtake him, because the way is long. Point of that is in Deuteronomy, they're trying to set up a lot of cities of refuge so you can find one that's close to you. So, because the way is long, the avenger of blood might come and strike and fatally overtake you, though the man did not deserve to die. Right? There's a lot of lead up to that. But that's what we're getting at. God says that a person who's in the forest and they're both swinging the axes and they're cutting down a tree, and if that axe flies off and you accidentally kill somebody, you don't deserve to die. It was an accident. It was done unintentionally. The way it's put here, though the man did not deserve to die, since he had not hated his neighbor in the past. That's not murderer. You didn't become a murderer by accidentally killing somebody, right? This is why even today our laws about manslaughter, it traditionally happens a lot with car accidents, right? If you accidentally got in a car accident and it wasn't your fault and you accidentally killed somebody, right? Imagine that, right? Imagine you're driving on the road, somebody hits you, and then you hit somebody, but you're the car who strikes them and kills them. Are you a murderer? I would say, no, you're not, right? You're not a murderer, even though you may have been partaking in killing somebody. Okay, that was kind of technical, but the reason for that is the Bible speaks to these issues. The Bible speaks to legal issues, and I want you to know about it, okay? Fourthly, in this text as well, God punishes. So we should enforce justice. This goes along with the last one. I won't say much about this, but the laws of Israel were written so that the people of Israel would enforce justice the way that God saw fit, based on all that we just talked about. In fact, there was times later in the Bible where God says to the Israelites, woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees, and the writers who keep writing oppression. Right? This is Isaiah chapter 10. God says, I hate it when people make unjust laws. I hate it when people are not executing justice. The book of Proverbs says it like this. Proverbs 17:15 says, he who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the righteous are both alike an abomination to the Lord. What does that mean? That means if you're somebody who says to the wicked people, you write some law, maybe you become a congressman and you're so important and it's amazing, we'll visit your office in D.C., it'd be awesome, right? Okay, if you do that and you're a part of like writing laws that let the wicked go free, he says that's an abomination to God. You don't let the wicked go free. And also, if you're somebody who writes laws to condemn the righteous, right? You put people in jail for doing the right thing, he says both of those things are equally an abomination to God. He hates that. Another thing about enforcing justice, you might say, okay, great. Does that mean if somebody kills me, I can take justice into my own hands and just like, I don't know, go to their house and shoot them, okay? No. The reason for that is because you live in a different society, and our society is ordered with something called the government, okay, which was not established here, although the basis of the government is here. Okay? Romans 13 puts it like this. That's actually a good one to turn to real quick. Romans 13, just to see this. Paul's talking about taxes, and he's talking about being a good citizen, and he says, yeah, you should be. Talks here about how, this is verse 4 of Romans 13, talks about the government. Says, he is God's servant for your good. Right? So God didn't have to set it up this way. And in Noah's day, they would have had to be the ones to administer justice because they're the only ones there. Okay? But pretty soon after this, by the time we get to Genesis 11, our next sermon, we have people breaking up into nations and different groups of people. We already see that in Genesis 11. So it says that's God's servant. Those people are God's servant for your good. If you do wrong, you should be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. That's super interesting. He says the government does not bear the sword in vain. What's the sword for? Right? It's for killing. He's saying your government, right, the Roman government was evil, bad in a lot of ways. But he says, hey, that Roman government, it bears the sword of God. And they can legally put you to death. And they don't bear that sword in vain. It says, for he's a servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. I know that's weird, but the book of Romans feels unrelated to Genesis. That's just going right back to Genesis 9. He's just saying the same thing. So, we should enforce justice. Now, what does that look like? The reason I even say we should enforce justice, that looks different in different societies. Right? If you were a king, if I was talking to you and you were the king of, I don't know, if you were the king of Israel, you were Solomon, David's son, I'd be telling you, okay, then the laws that you enforce and the people you put in charge, super important because you have a lot of power to enforce justice. Here's the thing. If I was talking to an average Israelite citizen, I wouldn't even talk about enforcing justice. I'd just be talking about like thinking highly of justice. The reason I say enforcing justice in our society is because in the United States, at least for now, you have some part as a citizen when you're an adult that you can play in the actual laws and the enforcement of those laws. That's unique. It's a unique privilege you get as a citizen of our country that you wouldn't get everywhere else. But because you have that privilege, you should be on the side of enforcing justice. And notice, like, this command back in Genesis 9 about, not killing somebody because God is going to see that you're killed. Do you know what that does? Laws in general, this is an ethical principle about laws. Laws don't just punish, they also prevent bad things from taking place, right? So like there was a movie that came out when I was in high school called The Purge, right? It was like a really bad movie, but the concept was interesting. Like if for one night everything was allowed, no laws, no rules, no punishment, what would happen, right? And then you started to see the whole point was like people would do a bunch of evil things, right? That's true. So laws do this thing of protecting you. When you walk around today in Southern California, you might not realize, but the law protects you in a massive way. If you went to a place that did not have the same laws and the same punishments, you would not be as protected. So laws protect the citizens of the domain in which they're talking about. Like even one of the elections, one of the things you have to vote for, all the adults that they vote for, there's a proposition right now, Proposition 36. It's all about kind of overturning a ruling about crime and punishment. It's basically, if you vote one way or the other, you're either saying, yes, I want California to be tougher on criminals and like actually put people in jail for stealing stuff, or not. Right? So the whole point is people are pushing this because and I think it's probably going to win. The reason they're pushing this is because they're saying, hey, for a long time in California, there's been such relaxed laws about theft that certain places you go, you can just walk in and steal up to about $1,000 with no repercussions. This is trying to change that. And the reason being is there are some places in California that are so dangerous because people are just walking in and stealing, and you can't even get anything without, asking the attendant, hey, I want the deodorant, can you unlock it with the key? Like literally in San Francisco, you have to go do that. Anyway, don't go to San Francisco, it doesn't matter. Okay. A lot we've been saying here. And also, Romans 13 is pretty clear that the job of government is to like enforce good rules and to protect people doing good and righteous things and to punish people for doing unrighteous things. And the problem is when those things get flipped around, now all of a sudden, God has to hold those governments accountable when they disobey God, right? Because the whole point is they're working for God. And when they don't work for God, God has to punish them. So, all right, we didn't even get to the scripture reading for today. Did you notice the scripture reading for today? I just included it to like be the last part of this section about the rainbow and God's promises and God's covenant, right? That's what Genesis 9 gets to. Basically, God said, all right, in this new world, I'm not going to flood it like I used to. You might deserve to have the world flooded, but he says, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to protect this world. The fifth thing, lastly, point number 5, God preserves, so we should be thankful. He says, I'm putting a sign of the covenant. It's going to be a rainbow, which is ironic, because if you saw somebody talking about rainbows or promoting rainbows, you'd think it's talking about the LGBTQ community, right? You think it'd be promoting that. Well, this rainbow is a sign of the covenant that God was not going to flood the world again, even though the world might deserve it. That's why, by the way, that's an insulting mockery of God's grace to take something that he said was the thing, I'm going to put this bow in the sky like we read earlier, and when I see it, God says, I will not flood the world again. God is super caring, and signs of covenants, there's a lot you get into, but today there's one main covenant that most people make, and it's the covenant of marriage, right? A big promise. And there's one sign of the covenant that is still popular today. You could go lab-grown or natural. You could go fake or real. I'm talking about wedding rings and diamonds, okay? That's a sign of the covenant. If you walk around and somebody's wearing one of these on their left ring finger, that means they're married or they're pretending to be married, okay? Don't pretend to be married. Just like guys, just a note on this. Guys with the rings, okay? Let's stop wearing the rings on this finger, okay? Guys, don't say it's a friendship ring. Stop with the purity ring. Like it's weird, right? You're not married. It's odd. And girls, like you shouldn't wear a ring on that finger either unless you're engaged. Then I'd say, great, congratulations. How'd this all happen, right? But that's a sign of the covenant, right? For marriage. The reason I bring that up is because when you see someone wearing a ring, what does that mean? To you, it means, oh, they're taken. It means, oh, they're married. Oh, they made a covenant. Oh, they're going to be faithful to that covenant. When a person wears a red wedding ring and they look down and they see it, what are they supposed to remember? Oh, covenant. Oh, I made a promise. Oh, I need to be loyal. God says that he puts the rainbow in the sky as a sign of the covenant, that when God sees it, he says, yeah, I'm not going to flood the world. And when you see it, you should say, yeah, God's not going to flood the world right now. Even though the world might deserve judgment, God's going to protect and preserve his world. So next time you see a rainbow, remember that God is protecting this post-Genesis 9 world. And our job is to live righteously, as righteously as we can in this world. So those are your 5 things. No small groups tonight. We got fellowship night. So make sure you talk to your leader about where you're going to be on Wednesday night, okay? I'm going to pray, and I'll let you out of here. Let's pray. God, thank you for speaking so clearly in your word about what's right and what's wrong. Thank you for all this information about law and ethics, and we know that your word speaks to every issue of life, it seems, and we're just so grateful that your word is clear. Pray for every student here to have their worldview or their thinking shaped by what the Bible says, and that we would understand that you made every sphere of influence, you made every public, private sphere, you made government, you made family, you made all these things, and our job is to listen to you and do things the way you want us to do. So please help us with this, help us think rightly for the rest of our lives on this. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.